Hey there everyone, this is Joe in General, your resident reason and evidence enthusiast. Today I talk with Philipp Pieper from Swarm.fund. Swarm.fund is an ICO, an initial coin offering that's coming up on September the 7th. Now, Philipp is one of the co-founders. Now, I did a previous video, about an hour long. I go through the white paper, the light paper, etc. But I had some questions at the end. So this interview is to serve that and to hopefully answer some of those questions that I had. Now, I'll cut straight to that interview in a second, but I just wanted to mention two quick things. One, straight after the interview, I'll cut straight back to myself and I'll give you my final thoughts, whether yes or no, whether I will be investing myself in Swarm.fund. Second thing is, there was a few technical difficulties with this interview, so I want to let you know that quickly. This is my very first interview on this channel, so I went and bought a fancy new webcam. There's plugins and programs you got to download and a whole lot of stuff you got to set up. I did an okay job. It's turned out all right. I will do better next time. Maybe I'll get some different programs and it's a bit of trial and error. But the main thing with this interview, at the very beginning and a tiny little bit in between, there's some latency issues. And latency is where the video and the audio don't match up, and it's like that. So that's at the very, very start. A little unfortunate, but that's why I'm telling you now. A tiny bit at the end, a little bit in the way in between, but it's mostly on my side. It's not on Philipp's side. So it is definitely watchable though, just except for that first part. You'll get through it. You'll be fine. So those two things, latency issue, and straight after it'll cut back to me and I'll give you my final thoughts. I hope you enjoy the interview and I'll see you in a second. Hey everyone, this is Joe in General, your resident reason and evidence enthusiast. Very, very happy to have Philipp Pieper on the line today. He is a partner, co-founder of Swarm.fund ICO. Now, a little bit quickly about Philipp. Philipp is a serial tech entrepreneur and became interested in decentralized technologies in 2015 when interacting with BitTorrent Inc. and the Mozilla Foundation. Now, Philipp has been a startup entrepreneur for the past 15 years and is a veteran in the digital data space. After holding various private equity and management positions within Deutsche Bank and Allianz Group, Philipp was founder and CEO of Proximic, a global data provider for digital media buyers. And he is a mentor at various accelerators such as Stanford StartX Singular University, as well as Tech Code. He holds degrees in engineering and business admin, and attended Berlin University of Technology and UC Berkeley Haas School of Business. Philipp, welcome to my channel.
Thank you for having me.
All right, not a problem. Happy to help. So, Swarm.fund ICO. Now, what I'll get my subscribers to do right now, if they're not familiar with what Swarm.fund is, I will get them to pause this video right now, go to check out my hour-long video on the Swarm.fund ICO. I'll also get them to check out your website, which is swarm.fund. Go through the entire website, the light paper, the white paper, the little section on how Swarm works, everything to do to get as much knowledge as they can before watching this interview. However, for those who can't be bothered doing that, who want the too long didn't read version, if you could kindly just give us a brief overview of what Swarm.fund is.
Sure. With Swarm.fund, we're intending to serve two different audiences. One audience is actually sort of the crypto investors, to give them an ability to get asset-backed tokens. And the intention there is actually to help them de-risk their portfolios. Most of the crypto investors today have something that goes up and down. We've lately seen 25% swings on a weekly basis, and that is unnerving. And so we are trying to bring a different class of assets to the ecosystem that have a different risk-reward profile and therefore have a much more stable but still healthy return profile. The second audience that we're sort of catering towards is then again sort of what we call them real assets owners and the money from Wall Street that wants to engage, and they're all seeking to engage in this space that we're in, but they're looking for compliant and well-structured and legally sound structures to engage in. So that is the overall goal, that we actually serve these two constituencies and make them actually sort of help them engage, be a platform that helps them facilitate money flows from right to left, and do that in a compliant and regulatory sound way.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you for that. Now, as mentioned, if people haven't watched my video, go and do that. Please check out the website as well. At the end of my video, I listed some pros as I understood them to be. And I think and I'll go through a list of those if you don't mind, and maybe you can speak to those and maybe, confirm or deny, my understandings or non-understanding of. One of the big ones, and which I think is one of the big advantages of a swarm fund, is that breaking down of the barrier to entry into what we would call old world investment opportunities. And breaking down that barrier by having all the legal frameworks in place beforehand. Does that accord with what Swarm Fund is?
Yeah, I would confirm that in two ways, right? So there are two aspects that are in that statement. One is actually sort of you've got these groups of potential investors that are looking to capture return. They're looking to engage in projects. They're looking for some reasonable way to gain some kind of alpha of some kind. And these can be two different profiles. It could be the professional investor, maybe the crypto professional investor that sits on a lot of money and has its own challenges. Or it could be the other one is a small investor from Kenya that only has $5 to spare and doesn't have an opportunity to participate in the returns that exist today on financial markets.
Fantastic. So that sort of ties into the other pro that I was talking about, which is there's that no minimum buy-in amount that you mentioned, like the guy from Kenya could, invest a small amount of money in, where traditionally to get into those old world investments, you have to have sometimes a minimum of $5 million, for example. So that's definitely, I think, one of those large advantages. Does Swarm Fund, do you think, evens the playing field pretty much exactly?
Well, so one thing clearly said that, and it ties into the second part of your question, and I'm going to give a little disclaimer before answering the question you just asked, because sure. The legally sound and regulatory sound way to do this also requires that actually these sub-entities, these sun token entities that get deployed on different verticals in different territories, et cetera, they will be compliant with local law and whatever they are applicable to. So that sometimes puts restrictions on things and sometimes doesn't. So, but at least it's from an efficiency perspective. So if we talk to people from Wall Street, what they admire about the model so far is actually the potential of efficiency, where if you're a syndicate leader, if you're a fund manager, you can come there and you can actually find a sort of a fund administration platform that gives you a much higher efficiency, both to gain access to capital, but also to manage your opportunities down below. So coming to the concrete answer of what you just asked is you need to respect that the playing field ultimately will be leveled, but we will do that in a way that actually is in conversation with regulators, that is in a way respecting the restrictions that apply. That said, the reason why most financial opportunities are not accessible for the $5 investor is purely the effort that they have to go through to qualify the investor. And so it mostly is less of a restriction through regulation. It's more a restriction through the choice and the efficiency and the sort of the profile of investor base that they normally have access to and want to cater towards.
Okay. Well, seeing as though we're on the subject of regulatory issues, China has just announced, and I'm sure you're very aware, China has just announced that they are banning ICOs. And this is, I'll just read this very quickly. It's from Gizmodo. According to blah, 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 ICOs be used for, China is saying, that ICOs could be used for pyramid schemes and other scams and could severely, this is their quote, severely disrupt the social and economic order. Now, the committee also provided a list of 60 major ICO platforms that local financial regulatory bodies will need to go through, thoroughly inspect, etc. This may affect at least 2 major Chinese cryptocurrency exchanges. So I think that would seem to me, obviously, more of an advantage for Swarm having all that stuff in place. Is there anything you'd like to talk about in regards to the recent banning from China of ICOs and how it affects Swarm Fund?
Yeah, and actually we're going to come out with a full-blown response to the latest developments in the next 24 hours, actually, that will be published on our site. actually, number one, nobody should be surprised that this is happening.
No, no, not at all. Not at all.
And so anyone who's actually seriously engaged in this space and is not intending to run a Ponzi scheme or get rich fast should actually know that they should have built their model with a foundation that is future-proof, including this scenario. And so, in a way, I'm very optimistic what's been happening, because in a way it actually reduces the noise, it reduces the discomfort that a lot of people have had with the space, and it introduces irrelevance to the conversation with the regulator. So we are at the moment where actually regulators are taking the innovation that is happening in the space extremely seriously, and that is a testament to the boundaries that everyone in this space has been pushing. But at the same time, it opens up actually a receptiveness to say that this is irrelevant conversation to have. It's not something that is further down the relevance scale, but it's something that is truly something to focus on, to have a conversation about, to find their way. So when regulators step in like this and they push the brake, it's mostly to actually sort of stop the status quo from evolving further and make up their mind, and do that mostly interaction with the models that they see to add value. So in our sense, I personally have been involved with China since 2009. And I do respect the way that China always looks at these things. They take a laid back approach, but then they step in and say, well, we need to find a way to regulate this, and this is what's happening. So for us personally, it's for Swarm.fund, it doesn't change anything. Quite to the contrary, I think we're welcoming that in a way we can actually have conversations with partners in China, which might be just purely on the investment side, and whether they can or cannot participate in a token offering like we're doing is up to the local authorities. It's up to the local tax laws, and everyone should decide for themselves whether they can do it or cannot do it. Right.
Absolutely.
In the end, I think, and I'm actually traveling to China myself on Friday for a week, and it's purely to build business partnerships and have conversations around the sort of the receptiveness of a model like Swarm.fund runs. And I'm very much looking forward to hearing everyone locally there talk about it.
All right, fantastic. It definitely seems like down the track, this could be something that separates the wheat from the chaff, so that the ones that just want a quick buck versus the businesses that want to last a long time. And I can see that being only positive for investors moving down the track. Do you see sooner rather than later, this similar thing happening in your part of the world and other parts of the world?
Well, first of all, the question is, what is my part of the world, right? We as we are part of a foundation, and that foundation has different localities. And Swarm as a platform is not meant to be a one territory only model. Okay. So we will have a huge amount of effort go into actually having localized conversations with local legislators and regulators to be aware of what their thinking is, to be compliant with what the current legislation looks like, and so forth. And again, it should surprise no one if there's more regulation coming in other parts of the world.
Absolutely.
If you choose to go through the effort, which is not a small one, you basically are future-proof. If you don't do it, you have always that risk that you're not really compliant at the end of the day, and your business model might not work out. Yep. So that's why, as painful as it is sometimes, and we know that regulators work by their own pace, it is worthwhile to know that you're actually sort of, at least in our model, actually there's a lot of experience as it flown into structuring how we structured the setup, how we went about the legalities around it. And with that, we know that we've done the best we can to accommodate the territories that we're planning to engage in the near future. Right. So whether that holds true for the future, we'll see. Right. But at least I think we can document very well that we've abided by the local legislation and legislation, and that serves us well. Right.
Yep. You've crossed your T's and dot your I's. Exactly. Fantastic. So moving on slightly to the types of investments which Swarm Fund will offer to investors. Now, in the beginning, my understanding is there is for want of a better word, a curated list of current investment opportunities, sort of old world finance investment opportunities. As the website in my video talks about, is the distressed real estate, software as a service, tech side of things, and also things like solar panels and solar installations and things like that.
Correct.
Is there anything else that you are currently either you have coming into place, like other financial investment opportunities, or are you open to almost anything? Like what are you open to in terms of what you will put forward to investors in Swarm?
So let me start off by just describing how we're seeing this go-to-market unfold, right? Because it's a three-stage approach. So the first stage is actually, very clearly targeted to these, curated funds that actually we have vetted, we have seen their track record. By the way, we'll actually publish videos with the fund leaders in a couple of days. Right. That will actually make it more tangible what we're talking about and how they see the opportunity with Swarm. I think it's a highly impactful way for people to get a impression that this is not just words on a piece of paper, but it's actually something that is tangibly and real.
Yes, absolutely.
But this first phase is essential because not only can we roll out a fairly scalable impact right out of the gate, right? These are business partnerships that we've been building for the last 12 months. So we're not waiting for some future product to exist for then a future market to be tapped into, but it's real and it's going to be unfolded within the next, hopefully 2 of those will be unfolded within the next couple of months. By the end of the year, we'll see actually sort of 2 of those asset-backed opportunities come to life and then the metrics being shown. But it's also for us to trial what is the community reacting to? How do they want to vet these opportunities? How do they consider good opportunity versus bad opportunity? What is the precautions that they're looking for? So as much as we made up our own mind on that, it includes being on a discovery path to actually find out what the community wants. Right? The second phase after that is based on the experience of the first phase, to actually develop criteria sets on how we would vet future third-party syndicate leaders that would approach us. And so it will probably be a little bit of word of mouth. We've already been approached by a number of people that would want to work with us. And people that we hadn't known before, but just through this discovery process in the market, we've actually come across them. They seem to be reasonable, but we will actually, after this first phase, come up with criteria how we would extend this group of people or the group of funds to work with, to then in the third phase actually have developed a more machine-driven approach, maybe a approach that involves community, a mixture of community workflow and actually machine-driven approach to vet what the process really looks like and how to objectify how good of an opportunity something is. And it's not just the aspect of quality, but it's also the aspect, what does the community want? It could be a territorial focus, it could be a sector focus, it could be a minimum expectation of experience that person brings to the table or the fund brings to the table. We don't know. We assume, but we don't know. Right. So it's clearly done in a way that, the curation has a trust element, and we want, as a team, we want to give the marketplace the right spin, meaning that if you just built a platform that was just naked right here and you would wait for people to come in, you will get a lot of noise and you will have a lot of difficulties to actually sort of show something that is solid right out of the gate. Right.
Sorry to interrupt. There might be that danger if you didn't have a curated list to start off with. There might be that danger of people coming in who have just random investment opportunities, like the emu farm or the this or the that, where that's open to a lot of let's say scam investments. So it's good that you do have a curated list to start off with, but as you just said, you are open to others coming in, if I understand it correctly.
Yes.
Except they will be very heavily vetted, and also vetted not only by yourself, by Swarm, but also by the community itself who is invested in the Swarm fund. Yeah.
So, and there's an aspect about, getting new funds in. And I think one thing that is really crucial about the scalability of what we're doing is that we're not trying to change necessarily how the fund operates out of the gate. So these funds exist, they have track records. If you try to change workflows on the operational level, it can get really messy, and there's a whole regulatory ball of wax that you then have to go through to qualify that in the end as well, right? So we are compatible with existing funds that have existing models, that have existing returns that they can document and so forth. So we actually already, one fund that actually we were approached by already has been proposing to their limited partners a 9-figure deployment in a future installation. Okay. We don't know whether we could capable to absorb that in that short period of time, but it shows that actually the existing investors or the existing sort of investors are trying to find new ways for existing opportunities to actually interact with both investors as well as the opportunities themselves. And when something's more efficient, we know that financial markets act really quickly.
Excellent, fantastic. Touching really quickly upon the liquid democracy. That's mentioned a lot within the white paper I mentioned on my video, etc. And that obviously ties in very much with, choosing what funds come in for investment potential. Can you quickly, just for my audience who may not understand what liquid democracy means after watching my video, after reading your white paper, etc., can you quickly give them the too long didn't read version of liquid democracy also? And I read this, I think, on one of the blog posts, recent blog posts on your website, liquid democracy versus network democracy. Can you touch upon those two things?
So you're touching on a portion of the white paper. Actually, there's, again, a clarifying blog post coming out tomorrow on liquid democracy.
It's like I almost said it on purpose.
Yeah, you're actually defining our communication strategy here. But it's a critical element. So one of the things that we made sure is, and it's not just for regulatory purposes, but it's actually for the purpose of running a cooperative ownership platform. We really mean that to the core, meaning that this is about not someone making decisions for someone else, but it's about you as a member of Swarm being able to come together with other members and find a means by which you can come to consensus how you want to invest, how you want to change the investment, maybe how you want to deploy capital, whatever the choices that you want to make. And obviously that also works in stages. So it will start off with a very rudimentary, more board-like system, but that is already predefined to be going into more base democracy, liquid democracy, in a very predefined schedule. Okay. So we as a founding team obviously start off because we have to set the scene, but we have the way to actually hand over more and more and more control to the community and educate the community how we would build tools for them to use to make these decisions. And these decisions are not just base democracy, which would be a very simplistic view on how to define democracy, but it involves things like, okay, well, in a liquid democracy sense, you always have the challenge that, you reach out to people, say vote, and sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. And number one, you have to avoid being a deadlock. Right. But the second aspect is, you have to find some empowerment of letting even minorities voice their opinion what they do not want. So only because someone might in future just gobble up a large amount of Swarm tokens and dictate what in a certain actionable majority what something should be doing, there should be still a voice of reason by the community to have a valid concern and prevent certain things from happening that is in the interest of a larger portion of the community. So all these mechanisms we've got, and I'm personally not the expert in liquid democracy, but we've got people that have been engaged in this space for 5 years. We've got experts that have been not just from the programming and product side, but also from the just game theory side, being involved in that. And it's an exciting space where, especially in this world where a lot of things happen with less names involved, it doesn't have to be anonymous, right? But it is a very interesting concept to find that consensus and execute that consensus. And that's why liquid democracy matters to us so much. Lastly, I think liquid democracy allows us to really hold true to that swarm intelligence promise, where the participation and the active involvement of each member can lead to something that is quite interesting and maybe better than actually just some representatives making single-handed decisions.
Right. So, and my understanding of the liquid democracy, part of it also is just like an IPO, or just say, you're invested in a large company through the traditional methods like an IPO, and they have their annual general meeting, for example. Now, you can't go to that meeting because you've got a life to live, but you can then delegate your vote to one of those. So my understanding is you can also delegate it to someone else if you couldn't be bothered making the decision yourself. You give your vote to someone that you trust, who's maybe proven themselves within the Swarm community as a good decision maker. As I understand, that's also one of the things. Is that correct?
Yes, and it even extends further than that. So, I might consider myself not the expert on solar energy projects, and so I identify you as that person, and I say, well, for these kind of category of decisions, I actually want to follow this guy because he's been showing that he's been doing the right decisions on this.
Okay.
It might be the same actually when it comes to the determination of security audits on the foundation level, that there's a panel of 7 people that are much better qualified than anyone else. They might actually get a huge amount of votes that they can actually act upon.
Right.
So the concept of delegation is I think key, because it leads also to people indirectly appointing other people that are better suited and that actually might be better suited for doing the job and be compensated for it.
Yep.
And that can happen implicitly without actually having to predefine how that governance structure looks like. So the democracy, by being able to delegate votes, can make choices to actually aggregate votes on a person's level because they trust that person a lot more.
Gotcha. Totally understand. Thank you for clearing that up. Appreciate it. Moving on to Swarm, having been around for a little while previous to this iteration. And I'm sure you've talked about it many times before. You may be getting sick of telling the story. But just for my subscribers who may have heard about Swarm before, or they may watch this video now, and inevitably they're going to, do a little Google search and see, blog posts from 2014. It's like, oh, Swarm's been around for a while. What's going on, or what happened? Now, everyone learns from previous iterations, whether things I could use a better phrase, but things went wrong in the past, or there were mistakes that were made, or something like that. Maybe things didn't go according to the plan of what the plan was beforehand. So if you don't mind telling my subscribers the history of Swarm, what didn't go to plan last time, and what you guys learned from that, and how things are different this time around. If you can quickly touch upon that, that'd be really helpful, I think.
Oh yeah, no, I think it's a core element. I mean, just let me start off by saying there was there was a moment where and I'll tell the story how Joel and I got to sort of revive this, but there was a moment in that conversation where I was poking into that as well, and it was like, so we have 2 choices here. Either we stick to the name Swarm and just make it a transparent process that this is an extension and prolongation of the history of what went good or bad in the past, or we don't, and ultimately it will actually come out anyway. So I was a very big proponent to say, well, let's be honest. Let's actually, number one, also let's take along the investors in the first iteration.
Yes.
And that's why we actually introduced the token swap process, where the first iteration tokens, where you'd be able to transfer it into the second iteration.
That's great.
So there's no switch and bait here, but there's actually a very transparent, like we're actually consciously taking that community along for the ride. Sure. And I wasn't there for that first iteration, so everything that sort of I know is secondhand. But from what I understand, and Joel is much better telling the details of that, and we actually have a lot of information on the site actually of that one. But it was an iteration where there was a couple of things that I identified as prohibitants, and they weren't really something that was able to be seen beforehand. So I think there were 3 elements. One is that it was based on a blockchain or a Bitcoin installation. So they were trying to install governance functions on the Bitcoin protocol, which is painfully slow and doesn't have smart contracts, concept, and it just has a lot of limitations to execute on that. So there was a real technology challenge that was really hard to solve.
Sure.
The second one was kind of interesting because when the first iteration raised the first amounts of funds, and I believe it was like $1 million at some point, a couple weeks after that, or maybe even as soon as a week after that, Bitcoin collapsed, and those funds were no longer $1 million, but they were, I think it was like $150,000. Right?
Okay, all right. Now I see the
that puts
part of the time puts a little dampener on things. Yeah.
Right. The third one is I think the market was very different, meaning, it was a much smaller ecosystem. There wasn't certainly wasn't the attention being given to the market as we see it today of really legitimate organizations that want to interact with the market. So as much as people might have wanted to, there was actually just an uphill struggle to gain some kind of visibility in executing that. Right. And then I can go down the list as well as like you in the end have this young market trying to reach something, and then with young people involved, and there's certainly some operational issues that happen too. So when I talk about what has changed, I would point to each one of them. We had a massive learning from the legal side. I think much of the great work that we benefited from in this iteration came from the fact that actually there was a very highly prolific community of lawyers and legislators that came together in different instances. There was one Harvard summit where Joel had put together a discussion group on what to do and how to look at it. So I think in this iteration we were prevented from going down a couple of rabbit holes that might have not been as visible to others than it was to us. Okay. I personally, in the genesis of coming together with Joel, which happened to be just because we ran across each other in Palo Alto, was that I had a fairly, cynical view on some of the initiatives that happened in the space. And I said, well, one of the biggest lacks is the go-to-markets. If there's no real go-to-market strategies, there's no real business partnerships that actually contribute to that, which you can learn from and so forth. So I think that is one of the key aspects that we were able to bring in this iteration with these partner funds, with actually a real attention to building something material. And then there's also just experience that comes into a new team, which is frugality and operational efficiency. I personally have built a couple of companies, sold them. Timo, who's the third partner on the team, has done the same. He's been 20 years also a tech investor, so he's seen firsthand, but also secondhand, how to run and operate. And so as long as we all know on the team what we can and cannot do, we'll be fine. Right. And built specifically around that sort of a very, very good operational mode where, we each do what we are doing best and abide by those rules. And that has led us to a good place so far.
Fantastic. And to confirm, was Swarm in its first iteration, was it a similar model to what it is building itself as right now? Was it doing the exact same thing but just in a slightly different way? Or was it almost an entirely different model to what it is now? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So I think the ultimate goal was still very similar, but the path to get there was quite different. Number one, I think the model was seen more as a as a real crypto equity model, which by all standards of a securities law is kind of prohibitive. So we definitely constructed around those aspects a much more sometimes complicated, but much more better understandable structure that differentiates the governance side of things to the actual security side of things, right? And then that leads us to a better place in this. So yeah,
fantastic, no problem. Thank you for sorting that. I think that was a big question that some of my subscribers may have had. I really appreciate that. Let's move.
And by the way, just to close off on that, I think so far we've seen a tremendous response to the transfer of the first iteration tokens into our tokens, which actually closed off today. But it's been fantastic to see The proponents of the model back then, as frustrated as some might have been, actually when it went dormant,
Right.
actually as positively and surprising actually it was when they saw that this iteration lives on and they are being taken along.
Yep.
And there's a new revived and basically sort of a renaissance of ideas that flows into making something of this magnitude happen.
Yep.
And so a lot of the thinking today is probably a little bigger than it was maybe back in the days. And I think that that so far people have really appreciated that.
Excellent. I like that idea. I like when a company or when anyone, as I'm a reason and evidence enthusiast, so when new information or better information comes to me, and when I know I've made a mistake, I will usually openly say, hey, look, I did something wrong. Now I have different and better information. Here's what I'm going to do differently. And, apologies or whatever. What I like about this is that you sort of, for want of a better phrase, owned up to the mistakes of the past, whatever that, some out of your control completely, some, just life experience. But you've taken your previous investors on the journey with you. So I really like that token swap model. I think rather than, again, for want of a better phrase, taking all their money in the first experience and then just sort of leaving them, on the side of the road. I really like that. No, you're coming still along the journey. Do the token swap. Here's the newer, better version of Swarm. Here's how we'll do things differently and better. Come along for the ride. So I really like that about Swarm Fund. I think that's
maybe that one word is to be stressed. It's like there's a maturing, and yes, there's also maturing of self-reflection, what went wrong, what went good, and complementing the team in the areas that may have not been covered in the past. Yep. But also the maturing of the market has happened, and the maturing on the legal side has happened, where there's a lot better understanding of, what are the directions that people want and so forth. So sure. I think, I really think that we're in a good place as a market, and we're in a good place to actually be sort of, successful driving a model like this into the market.
Fantastic. Okay, so let's wrap it up a little bit now. We'll talk about a little bit more about the meat and potatoes of it. So as mentioned at the start, we've got the token sale, which starts September the 7th, 4 p.m. UTC time. So just, everyone do a Google search for what the hell is UTC, and you can figure that out for your own country. Can you talk briefly about the token sale model, about, initial starting price, how the price differs as the sale goes ahead, and that sort of stuff, just to give everyone, a real meat and potatoes version of what to expect at 4 p.m. on the 7th of September, and things like, are there particular gas limits and user data and any of that sort of stuff? Can you speak to that?
Yeah, sure. By the way, everyone should look at the sort of the structure. We laid it out in the white paper and the price and the sort of sales section as well, where it's like you have this process flow. Yes. So we started off with a pre-sale, which was fairly successful, and we basically got people involved that we care about, that actually were big proponents in the model, and helped us actually sort of gain a higher degree of visibility in certain areas. Mm-hmm. So by tomorrow, which is actually sort of September 5th, we will have the smart contracts being armed with all the details that actually go into or coming from the pre-sale and going into actually sort of the transfer of US dollar into Ether. And so what happens then when pushing the button or actually distributing this on the production net, and then sort of it opens up on Thursday, there is a batch of 33 million tokens. That is the target token sale, mm-hmm. Which means that the price is defined also in the white paper. It starts at $1 and then increases, but actually levels off then. And can go within 2.5 weeks to a maximum cap of so the target amount to raise is $55 million, mm-hmm. And then the maximum cap is at $255 million. And the reason for that leveling off is that the difference between the two is not that we have more operational expenses to spend, mm-hmm. but it is simply that the market and the purchasers have a bigger belief that there should be more assets that we should get this going with. So it just increases the scale of deployments into the asset base, which is quite significant, right? So I think there's going to be interesting to watch the vote of confidence, but there's it doesn't change the way that we're looking at the go-to-market, whether we have one number or the other, right?
Sure.
So it runs for 2.5 weeks. It runs until September 22nd. Mm-hmm. By the time it's September 22nd, it's going to close off. Mm-hmm. And then after that, the token sphere is fixed. So it starts off with 100 million tokens. It might end up being higher depending on how high the demand is, but it's not out of magnitude order. Mm-hmm. And then after that, we basically do a postmortem, and everyone who's actually chimed into that smart contract gets a distribution of swarm tokens into the ERC20 wallet. And then after the sale, and I think this is quite a crucial element as well, we've built in something called release of liquidity. You could call it a drip liquidity.
Yes.
Where we basically said, this is a model that lives off of stability, right? We actually, aside from the fact that you have good returns, you want actually the market to start to appreciate the developments and actually not have a extreme pump and dump of some kind, but you want something that is well understood. So what we defined is actually that every 42 days within the next 12 months, there will be 1/8 of the tokens that you as an investor or as a purchaser have purchased will be released into liquidity.
I understand.
And it allows a couple things to happen, right? It allows a more continuous flow of tradable tokens to exist. But secondly, also it allows the community to interact with us, for us to show the community the progress. So it's more properly like a real communication effort between these two constituencies. And I think that will do everyone very well.
Absolutely, yes. That's most definitely stops the big whales coming in and buying up a whole bunch of tokens and just dumping them straight on the market. That's that happens quite regularly. So that's a very.
And by the way, there's enough justification for that. I'm not judging on it. It's
sure.
every model should look for their own purpose, and especially if we want to engage with proper financial institutions that obviously look for more stability than that kind of high volatility. Yeah. You need to document that you work by their standards. And what happens 12 months down the road, it's going to be all liquid. It's not that we're meaning to keep anyone from transacting, quite to the contrary. Right. But by that time, we actually have proven out things. By that time, we actually have shown the deployment scale. We've probably already interacted with financial institutions that might actually co-invest with us into those sub-funds. And it will be a much more understood model. The direction will be understood. The implication will be understood. Yeah. And its place in the ecosystem as well.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I like investments and companies, and I'm the same sort of person. I'm in it for the longer term rather than the really quick short term gains. So that's what one of the reasons why I like Swarm Fund so much. If we can touch upon really quickly the difference between, I've been obviously people who've watched my video and who have read the white paper and the light paper, etc. Notice a difference between Swarm tokens and Sun tokens, the Swarm Utility Network tokens. Can you briefly touch upon the difference between those two and how that sort of moves forward with being an investor in Swarm Fund?
Yeah, I think you're touching on a very critical element here. For us, constructing the model was never about evading regulation or evading people that want to take a stab at shutting things down, but quite to the contrary, we want to make it flexible enough to meet all these different demands in different territories and different applications. So one of the key elements was how to build a platform that has an overall member base, and this is the Swarm token that represents basically how to run the foundation, where to deploy operational expenses, what capital to deploy where, what does the product pipeline look like,
so what are the research... It's the membership token, sorry to interrupt there, but that Swarm Fund, exactly. Essentially the membership token, and then and then you've got the Sun token as the sub token, it's my understanding. So please go ahead.
So that foundation actually then obviously starts up sub-funds, but these sub-funds, and it's not really sub-funds because they're somewhat parallel to this. There's no hierarchy between the two. They're just, they happen to be running on the software and on the network that, the foundation is going to create over time and has created to this day. But then sort of the foundation benefits from whatever business model then applies to that vertical in that territory. So in some territories, it might be, a percentage of assets under management, maybe a percentage of the profits coming through, whatever it is. It might sometimes be a SaaS model. It really depends on the application, right? Okay. So the foundation then accumulates more funds, which it can use to actually start more verticals. And then the governance of that actually increases. So basically the swarm users have a bigger say in actually a bigger realm of actually deployed capital. But they also will get the opportunity to look at these sub-tokens that exist and make decisions whether they want to sort of transfer their ownership into that specifically, and rather than actually stay on that level.
Okay.
So let's talk about the Sun tokens for a second. So the Sun tokens are crucial to abide by those regulations and the rules and that are in place, because they most certainly in some cases will be securities, and that's fine, right? If you create the legal structures around it and you create the investor qualification processes around it, if you abide by those rules where you can engage, where you cannot engage, that is perfectly legitimate, and it's not a bad thing, right?
Sure. As long as I presume there would be, and I have read this in the paper, but the AML, anti-money laundering considerations, the KYC, know your customer considerations as well. So I imagine, and correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is, obviously Swarm token, membership token, and then if, depending on the fund, I guess, there might be certain extra levels that one might need to go through as the investor in Swarm. So let's say I buy the Swarm token, that's my membership token, and then I want to invest in the distressed real estate fund. And then as part of that, there might be, okay, if you want to do in that fund, we need to go through your KYC, your AML, and sort of the extra little hoops to jump through. Does that make sense?
Yes, but as much as the foundation starts off developing these, each one of these asset-backed token entities, and these will be specific legal entities that actually have a name on their governance and so forth, right? They will actually be able to source capital from different sources. I mean, one first source is going to be the Swarm Foundation, but it could be directly sourcing from crypto investors, or it could be actually sourcing from fiat investors in their respective realm. Meaning that that's one crucial blend of different things where a balance sheet doesn't always look as straightforward as people assume it to be. And if you can actually replicate this kind of blend of liquidity and make it compatible with the traditional way plus these new ways, you get the opportunity to be part of a much bigger play, because you're actually not necessarily creating an entirely new subcategory, but you're making yourself compatible with an existing landscape of financial opportunities.
Sure. Now, playing devil's advocate for a second, I was thinking off the top of my head, if, for example, because there are people out there who don't like going through, and I've known this very much. I used to work in the gold. I still do work in the precious metals industry, and I have done for a number of years. And we get people coming in, or we used to in the place I used to work in, who, if you spend under a certain amount, you don't have to provide your ID, you don't have to go through the KYC and the AML and all that. You just give us your money and we give you some gold. Now, similarly, if someone just wanted to invest in the Swarm membership token, but for whatever reason, and it's their own business, they don't want to have to go through the other KYC stuff, are they able to still get investment benefits from just holding the Swarm membership token and have never have to engage in the other sub funds, in the other funds themselves? Do you understand what I mean? Is there
so very clearly? So I don't. It will be dependent on actually the requirements of the sub entity or these entities that are actually running these asset-backed tokens. So we will have to be consistent across the board that if certain opportunities require that qualification across the board, everyone has to abide by those rules, right? Now there's still a portion that obviously is the Swarm Foundation being a licensee of a software that basically benefits from that operational model in some way, but it could also be a SaaS fee that, obviously indirectly someone like that would benefit from the investment opportunity. But let's also be clear that that's on relative scale, that's nowhere near what actually a direct investment would look like, right? So Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So of course it would benefit for everyone to not only participate in the membership token, but also then participate within the the funds. I mean, and that would be obviously the main reason why people would be buying into Swarm Fund, not just to and again that's the way I see Swarm Fund set up is not to just buy the Swarm token and then sell it on an exchange later on. It's to get people involved in the community in these various different investment funds. So thank you for
Yep.
setting that out. Now we'll wrap this up because I know you've got stuff to do. Is there anything else that you feel that my subscribers or the general crypto space should know about Swarm Fund that maybe hasn't been put out there just yet, or anything you feel like you want to explain differently or better? Is there anything that you wanted to add before we wrap up today?
So yeah, I do think that there's two aspects that I feel strongly about, and actually the rest of the team does too, about the sort of the direction that it's taking. As much as we're in short term focusing on the right go-to-market with these aspects that we've been discussing, the right asset categories with the right go-to-market and so forth. Ultimately, this is all about two core aspects about the investment landscape. One is it's about like making things more efficient, and there comes machine-driven analysis that is actually going to be quite powerful, that is going to be able to make use of this infrastructure and these scale of opportunities that we are going to be tapping into, which I personally have been in the investment landscape for quite some time, and I've seen so much inefficiency on that front that actually that's quite a disruptive innovation in financial services, right? The second aspect is actually the direction that it can take also from the investment opportunities. We've been already approached by people that actually build housing in Pakistan, and that want to do rainforest preservation, and want to sort of tap into this community that also feels strongly about these opportunities, and that don't have a local financial ecosystem that actually works as good as we know it in our respective territories, right? So I think it's very, very exciting to think about the revolution it can bring to just the financial investment ecosystem, and just as a investment opportunity as a whole, by being like having purpose-driven funding pools that can do something of good, and have a good means and efficient means to bring together swarms of different people that feel strongly about certain things.
Okay. Fantastic. Well, look, if there's nothing else that you wanted to add, I want to say a very large thank you for for being on my show today on my channel. It was Swarm Fund ICO is one that, as I mentioned in the video, just came to me around about the way. It wasn't originally on, the ICO alert websites and all that. It was through sneaky little advertising. I thought, what is this thing? And then once I checked it out, I really like the value potentially that it adds to me as an investor. And down the track, if there's any other questions, I'm sure that people can go to the website swarm.fund. If there's any specific questions people have, I presume they can also go to the Telegram group as well. Is that a little community you suggest everyone sign up for?
It's thriving. We have a lot of good active discussions going on there. So please join.
And just lastly, if you didn't hear it at the start, token sale starts September 7th, 4 p.m. UTC. Make sure you've got your Ethereum ready. Philipp, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
So that's the interview. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it did it justice for you guys. And I hope that latency thing wasn't too much of an issue for you at the start. Now, my final thoughts, and of course I'll preface all of this with the usual stuff. It's not financial advice. Do your own research, of course. Don't just do something because I'm going to do it or not do it, right? So get all those things in place, do your own research, gather your own info, watch as many videos as you can on Swarm Fund, check out their website, their light paper, their white paper, all that jazz. But I was about 90% of the way there to a yes in between doing my original video and this interview today. Now, it's been a few hours since I did the interview this morning, and after sort of mulling it over a little bit, I'm 100% there now. And again, this is just personally what I am going to do. I have decided to invest a small amount into Swarm Fund. I see it as something which is worthwhile as a long-term investment and a small investment that is. I don't put all my eggs in one basket. I like to spread my risk around all the different cryptos and precious metals and stuff like that. So don't put all your eggs in one basket. I'm certainly not doing that, but I have decided, cards on the table, I am going to invest a small amount in Swarm Fund. So I will be there at 4 p.m. UTC, September the 7th, with my amount of Ethereum ready to go to invest in the Swarm Fund ICO. You may consider doing the same. I don't know. That's up to you. So I'd like to thank you very much for watching. Lots more to come on my channel. Just go to Joe in General, hit that subscribe button. Much more to come. Thanks very much, gang. Stay safe, stay informed. Speak soon.